We're going to talk today specifically about the axle deadlift, how it's different, and how you can use it as a simple change up to your training that is guaranteed to supercharge your deadlift. And stay tuned to the end because I'm going to give you my favorite trick for using the axle deadlift that has led me to hit PRs in the same session. What stands out to many people with the axle deadlift is the fact that it's thicker, which makes them believe that it is primarily a grip exercise. Now, this is true because the thicker bar opens your hands up, which puts them in a weak position. So you need a very strong grip to hold on to an axle. That's a limiting factor in axle cleans. And if you're going without straps, that is the limiting factor for an axle deadlift as well. They do double overhand axle deadlifts, and arm lifting is a test of grip strength. Anything over 400 pounds is like elite territory. And even mixed grip can still be tricky, especially given that many axles are coated in some finish that is certainly not ideal for grip strength. So when you see strongmen in training and in contests doing their deadlifts with straps, many people wonder, why the hell would anybody use straps? I thought this was a grip thing. It can be a grip thing, but it most often isn't. While strapless deadlifting is viable, it turns it immediately into a grip event, and that can work against what you're trying to do, both in training and in a test of strength with a deadlift type event. It also increases the chance of bicep tears. This was a big problem for a long time when they were doing like max 18-inch axle deadlifts without straps, like 15 or 20 years ago in strongman. Guys would go with what is called a monkey grip, which is a thumbless mixed grip, and they were tearing biceps because you get more purchase, it's easier to hold on to, but it also makes that bicep tendon extremely vulnerable, and it led promoters and athletes to think, what the hell are we testing here? What's the point of this? Is the juice worth the squeeze? The simple fact is, if you're looking for an athlete to test their legs, hips, upper back, their pain tolerance, their metal, if you want to see them grind, they have to be strapped in. That doesn't mean that they're cheating by using straps. It just means that the event is going to be more difficult than a barbell for different reasons. And there are some very good reasons that impact competition, but also impact your training if you choose to use this as a variation, which I do recommend you do at some point. The difficulty of the axle deadlift is preserved with straps because the axle is thicker, which changes the leverages for the worse. You have to bend over just a little bit farther to get under it. And if you've seen how mobile many strongmen are, you know that that's a big problem by itself. And it's also a little bit further out. If you're a deadlift technician on a barbell, you have your leverages, your setup down to the millimeter. So having the center of mass move a little bit further away from your shins also puts a surprising amount of stress on your midsection, your upper back. It taxes the start of the movement a lot more. It makes a huge difference. Now, the biggest thing aside from that is the lack of whip. There is zero whip in an axle. And we live in a world with unruly spaghetti bars and elephant bars that flex an immense amount before the weight even breaks off the ground. And people can exploit that. They can hit into the bar with a ton of power, build up a ton of momentum, so they can get into their optimal position, like mid-shin or even at their knee, with a bunch of momentum on the bar. And technicians can get really, really good at that. The axle deadlift requires strength at the very start of the lift, and that's where many pro deadlifters have conditioned themselves to be weak. Even a power bar gives more whip than an axle. It might not seem like a lot, but it's actually substantial. The first time I transitioned to an axle from doing a lot of stiff bar pulling, I actually strained my trap because I wasn't used to the stability needed to break a truly dead weight. And as I got better at handling that, my setup overall got better. The fact of this stiffness of the axle prevents things like dive bomb or jerk pulling styles. It requires a very controlled and deliberate start. If you're used to yanking into the weight, you're going to find that when you yank into an axle, the axle is going to say no, and it's going to be 3 seconds of straining in a shitty position before you even get it to break. So you really have to start deliberate, slow, and even. Now, any of you watching this that fancy yourselves good deadlifters, I'm going to issue you a challenge. One of the events that popped up a few times at the Arnold Amateur World Championships and Nationals was a deficit deadlift, a 4-inch deficit with an axle, 4 repetitions. This is a horrendous position that will test not just your flexibility, but it'll test your leg drive, your bracing ability, and your desire to suffer. This position will show you very quickly that there is more to being strong in a deadlift than just the strength that you can demonstrate in your most favorite position most often. At these events, some of the best deadlifters around were getting absolutely stapled because being a little bit out of their comfort zone made them completely ineffective. But you also had somebody like Gabe Pena, who currently competes at the World's Strongest Man, who was able to clip off 8 reps plus with a 675 axle, like an absolute machine. And that speaks to how well-rounded he is, how deliberate he is, how technical he is, how much leg drive he has, paired with how much of a stiff midsection and upper back he has. He is just a deadlifting unit. And that was one of the most impressive things I've seen, especially given how much of the rest of the field just absolutely tanked. In prepping for that, I had to learn how to get more flexible. I had to fix my weaknesses. I always struggled at the start, not because I didn't have horsepower, but because I wasn't confident in my position. Given my bad leverages, given my history of injuries, my brain would always put the brakes on. So getting strong and comfortable and confident in a disadvantaged position absolutely fixed my start, and it was a big overhaul to my training. Now, what does this mean for you? It means that this is one of the best things you can do to condition starting power, because it reinforces the setup and the strength of all of the muscles that you need to have a good, strong, efficient start where you don't leak strength. And it also reinforces leg drive. So you're absolutely going to build horsepower at the very start of your deadlift. It worsens your leverages slightly, which means you have to work harder, but also lighten the load, which can be very useful for those of you that have trouble recovering from deadlifts. It's much more taxing on the upper back and the midsection, something that can never be strong enough in a deadlift, and very few people have those areas topped out. It punishes form break, so it reinforces good technical practice. And the best part is that axle PRs almost always correlate to PRs in your regular setup. Now in 2024, many gyms have axles available, but if yours doesn't, they're super easy to get a hold of. One of the things I like is that it is so cheap. And even if you're in a corporate gym, it's not hard to bring in your own. I used to bring my axle bar into LA Fitness, and I would do continental cleans and deadlifts and snatches for grip strength with everybody looking at me like I was a weirdo. The cheapest option is to go get a galvanized metal pipe from Home Depot for like 25 bucks and duct tape collars on. That's what I did. Not durable, but it does a job. Just don't bank on getting exceptionally heavy, and don't bank on dropping it overhead. Now, my recommendation is just to go through Titan. I like Titan for cheap equipment that you don't need to break the bank on, because it's pretty reliable. It does what it's supposed to, and it's much cheaper than their competitors. Titan's axles rated for over 600 pounds, and it will do great as long as you don't drop it. But all hollow axles are gonna run the risk of being bent. So if you want something heavy duty, you can do what we did and get a 7-foot long piece of solid tube steel. It weighs about 75 pounds. It's gonna be invincible. You could drop an atom bomb on it. Those things took a beating. That's what we use for contest prep all the time. It's a little more expensive, and you probably have to find a local metal shop to put it together for you. Also consider straps. Again, unless you're training grip specifically, do not do your deadlift accessory with an axle without straps. It's pointless, it's silly, you get no points for it, your training's worse. The two options you have are figure 8 straps or extra long traditional straps. Now for those, I prefer nylon just because they're thinner, they're easier to wrap, and as long as you're chalked up, they bite really well. Cotton's a bit thicker, and it's a pain in the ass to try and get it to wrap around the axle. It's doable, I just don't like it quite as much. Just make sure they're longer than normal. Figure 8s work really well as well. If you're comfortable with those, just make sure you get a size up, because if they're too small, you'll have trouble getting your hand through them. Cerberus has a pretty good pair that you can get on Amazon, and links for my preferred stuff is in the description. So if you need some ideas, go ahead and click on those, and it helps the channel out. So hey, win-win. Are you looking for access to exclusive programs from the best minds in the field and some of your favorite YouTube influencers? Then look no further than Boostcamp. Boostcamp is a long-term sponsor of this channel, and I wouldn't be partnered with them if they didn't provide a great product. If you want optimal performance, you cannot just wing your weight selection. You have to make deliberate steps forward, so you need a program, and you need a way to track progress on it. They make it easy to track your workouts from the convenience of your phone, so you never have to rely on your sloppy handwriting or your bad memory. And they give you access to a library of exclusive programs from some of the most well-known names in the business. Eric Helms, Bryce Lewis, Jeff Schofield, Bald Omni-Man, and yours truly. We all have programs up there that can only be found on the app, and it is absolutely free. My programs, Bull Mastiff and 70s Powerlifter, are both up there, and you can also check out Full Sturker, which tells you how to get strongman jacked using the things you find in a corporate gym. So special thank you to Boostcamp for making this channel possible. Unburden yourself from the hard business of making the perfect program from scratch. We've got them pre-made for you. Download their app right now by clicking the link in the description. If you're going to use axle deadlifts in your training, you want to make sure that you're going to prioritize the start position at whatever height you're using, whether you're doing it deficit from the floor, mid shin at your knee. However, you're not focusing on the lockout. You're not focusing on anything other than the break, because that's where it's going to be the hardest compared to anything else you could do. I don't recommend touch and go. I recommend a controlled start every time, resetting, bracing, deliberately accelerating through that stick point at the start. You always want to be slow and deliberate until you get comfortable with it. Don't try and yank off the ground. It takes time to get that pattern ingrained where you can really go hard at the start. Keep in mind, there's also going to be more fatigue per rep, especially if you're new to it. So if you are planning like a max effort session or doing a bunch of working sets or an AMRAP, you're going to be a bit more gassed than if you were just doing the deadlifts that you were used to. So you might be surprised in how quickly the weight drops off or in your ability to do things after those set. Now, an interesting thing is that fatigue tends to be less session to session if you're rotating. So if you jump from, let's say, regular deads to axle deads each session, even though they're harder in certain ways, the fact that you're not hitting the same neurological structures and patterns the same exact way means that you get kind of an element of recovery. That's kind of the beauty of a conjugate split, is that you can go really hard in different exercise variations while still getting recovery and not backsliding. You don't have fatigue accumulate quite as much week to week. Now, there are 3 ways that I like to use axle deadlifts. This is what I've used for myself, for contest preps, to improve weak spots in my deads, and for a lot of my clients. The first one is to use it as a main lift. It's so mechanically similar to your regular lift that you can swap it out, focus on it until you prove that you've gotten better at it, and then go back to your main lift. You are going to be better. There's no scenario where you swap your barbell deadlift for an axle deadlift, come back, and then you're worse. That never happens. It's only a positive to your deadlift to take time to focus on this. So you can do a block for 6 weeks, or you can do an alternating split. Now, I'm not a huge fan of conjugate, but that is definitely an option. And it does give you the ability to manage recovery while pushing your deadlift weekly, assuming you have a pretty good handle on how you select exercises for something like that. The second way to program axle deads is as an accessory after the main work or on a different day. Now, if you have some experience, you can tweak these a little bit to further target weak areas. 1 or 2 inches turns this into a monster movement for overhauling the start. Again, it forces you to be flexible, to start really tight and have absolutely maximal movement efficiency when you break that bar off the ground. And you can also use it for elevated pulls or paused variations, because however hard a halting deadlift is, when you bring it up mid shin or below your knee and pause and then finish the lift, it is just way harder with an axle. So if you're weak at that spot, it's going to feel impossible. So it's a really, really good training stimulus to hit those areas. One of the things I recommend is like an 18-inch or somewhere right below the kneecap. That's a common height in contests, and it kills everybody, because you might think you're strong there because you use a bar, but the bar flexes above your knee and it turns it into a hand thigh lift where you're really, really, really strong. This is why silver dollar deadlifts are stupid, because you have maximal leverage advantage above the knee to like a ridiculous degree. If you put an axle there, you're going to find that there's a dead spot. It's no man's land. So not only is it a sign of a lot of strength, but it's a great training stimulus to get your hamstring stronger from a dead stop with no flex. Now, the third way, this is the secret. This is one you don't hear people talk about. One of my favorite ways to use axle deadlifts is as a primer for your main deadlift that day. It's a type of post-activation potentiation if you do your heavy deadlifts first on an axle and then switch over to a barbell. Now, you don't want to gas yourself out. Again, you have to keep in mind how quickly you fatigue, but if you do a thorough warm-up with an axle, focus on a strong, deliberate, aggressive start, do a somewhat challenging work set, and then drop back, move to a barbell, take 1 or 2 sets to warm up, and then get back to your working weight. It's going to feel like you discovered a second gear. It's going to feel like you're cheating. It's going to feel like you're doing a deadlift above the knee. It's so comfortable. You're going to be so much faster. You're going to be so aggressive getting into the weight. And that's something you're not going to want to do every week, but as a short-term tune-up for your deadlift, it's very viable. I really like that approach. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.